I'm Rachel Floor, incoming Executive Director of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation. On behalf of all of my library and foundation colleagues, I thank you for coming this evening. I would also like to acknowledge the generous support of our underwriters of the Kennedy Library Forums, our lead sponsor, Bank of America, the Lowell Institute, and our media sponsors, the Boston Globe, Xfinity, and WBUR. I'm also delighted to welcome all of you who are watching today's program online, including my two children, so quick shout out to Johnny and Henry. Go to bed. We thank you all for silencing your cell phones. As many of you know, President Kennedy was a student of history. He once said, "We celebrate the past to awaken the future." He was also, of course, a politician, and a hallmark of his politics was a natural wit and a self-deprecating humor. As our guest tonight recounts in his book, when President Kennedy was asked in an interview for his reaction to the JFK impersonator Vaughn Meader, he responded in a typically joking way, saying, "I listened to Mr. Meader's record, and frankly, I thought it sounded more like Teddy than it did like me." So now he's annoyed. This evening, to bring together history, politics, and humor, we are delighted to welcome Mo Rocca.
Thank you. Thank you.
An Emmy winner, he is a correspondent for CBS Sunday Morning, a frequent panelist on NPR's hit weekly quiz show, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and the host of the Henry Ford's Innovation Nation on Saturday mornings on CBS. He has been a correspondent on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, the creator and host of the cooking channels My Grandmother's Ravioli, and a writer and producer for the Emmy and Peabody Award-winning PBS series Wishbone. The topic of our discussion tonight, Mobituaries, Great Lives Worth Reliving, is his most recent book, and Mo has kindly agreed to sign copies of his book after tonight's program. Our bookstore will be selling copies if you're interested. I'm also so pleased to introduce our moderator for the evening. Rick Berke oversees STAT, a media company focused on finding and telling compelling stories about health, medicine, and scientific discovery. He was previously a longtime reporter and editor at the New York Times, where he was chief political correspondent for more than a decade. In his roles as editor, he served 2 tours as an assistant managing editor and was also Washington editor, national editor, political editor, and video content editor. Before coming to Boston to launch STAT, he was executive editor of Politico. Please join me in welcoming our special guest this evening.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Mo, this is going to be a lot of fun.
I think so.
I think it will be. I can't wait. First of all, I just want to say, thankfully, I love the book, because I wouldn't say that if I didn't. And it's like, it's so joyful, even though it's about sort of people who are dead, it's sort of joyful.
Yeah, it is.
And I learned so much, and it's a great history lesson. I could go on and on about it. But before I start getting into talking about Mobituaries, I want to ask you, I want to put you on the spot, if I may.
Sure.
Since I've known you a long time, I think I feel okay to do this. You say in your book, you kind of boast that you're a, quote, geographical show-off.
Right.
And I know the capital of every country in the world.
Yes.
So let me try you.
Okay, they're new countries every
that's
week.
Why, I know.
All right.
But I can't resist, because let's see, put your money where your mouth is here. Okay, Mauritius.
The capital of Mauritius is Port Louis.
Yes.
Okay. Mo is short for Mauritius. It's easy.
Myanmar.
The capital of Myanmar is...
Myanmar. See, I don't know what... All right.
The capital of Myanmar is Yangon. When it was Burma, it was Rangoon. Extra points.
Here's a newer one, newer country, East Timor.
Oh, the capital of East Timor, is it Dili?
Yes.
Oh, God, okay, thank you. I knew it sounded like a herb.
All right, okay. 2 more. This is pretty good. You are living up to your boast here.
I just have to say that when I memorized these all as a child, and when the Soviet Union fell apart in 1990, I almost had a nervous breakdown. This is a cascade of stands. Anyway.
Well, speaking of stands, Kazakhstan.
The capital of Kazakhstan, it used to be Alma-Ata, but now it's just Astana.
Nur Sultan.
Now you're just making noises.
Okay, maybe you're.
What did you have? Is something? Are you okay? Do you need to lie down?
Let me.
It might be new. I don't. I'm old-fashioned.
Djibouti.
The capital of Djibouti is Djibouti.
Yes.
It's a trick question.
All right, well, let's give him a round of applause. That's
Thank
pretty
you very
impressive.
much. Good night, everyone.
That's pretty impressive. Anyway, so tell us about your multi-platform sort of obituary guy. Like you have on your show, on your TV show, your podcast, and now the book. What is your fascination with death? And this comes really from your father, Jack, your late father.
It does come from my father. My father loved obituaries. My father was not a morbid person. He was, in fact, perhaps the most optimistic person I'll ever know. He was very buoyant, very sunny, and he had a real sense of the romance of life. And many great obituary writers have said this, that a good obituary is really about someone's life, not their death. And, you know, a good obituary to me feels like the movie trailer, the preview for an Oscar-winning biopic. It kind of has that dramatic sweep, you know, the highs, the lows, and hopefully the survival. And a good one can leave you breathless. So that's where I got it from him. And he was not morbid. And I'm actually more interested in certainly people's journeys, but even in their beginnings than their ends. So.
What's the difference between an obituary and a mobituary?
So a mobituary is an appreciation for someone who didn't get the send-off he or she or it deserved. It could be a famous person, someone who's still a household name, like a Sammy Davis Jr. or an Audrey Hepburn, who I don't think is remembered in quite the way they should be. It could be somebody who was once wildly famous, like the so-called Siamese twins, Chang and Eng, that people of a certain age, my age, will remember probably from the Guinness Book of World Records. Everybody's nodding because of that picture. And they were two of the first entertainers in America, and have an extraordinary story, and are primarily only remembered for that picture. It could be somebody, a series throughout the book and the podcast called Forgotten Forerunners, of people who were pioneers well before the people we think of as pioneers. Or it could be a thing like the station wagon, which when it died in 2011, didn't get an obituary, even though it really started going downhill in 1983 with the introduction of the minivan, which, can you believe it, we all once thought was kind of sexy. But what they all have in common is I'm interested in them, basically. So it's a canny little device for things that I'm interested in.
And it's interesting how you kind of pop up in this book, you know, throughout the book. And you mentioned Audrey Hepburn. You've got to tell the story of your work as was it a fragrance consultant?
I was a fragrance specialist. So when I was 23, I worked at Macy's at Herald Square in New York, and it was one of the busiest retail floors in the world. And one day, Audrey Hepburn, in April of 1992, walked by my counter, and the floor fell silent. And I think even if cell phones had existed back then, you wouldn't have thought to shove your hand in front of her face to take a selfie. She just had a kind of aura, a presence. A few months later, I don't know that anyone knew how sick she was. She died. And she died on the same day as Bill Clinton's inauguration. And I remember this. I remember living in a small apartment on East 80th and by a newspaper kiosk and looking at the USA Today, when there were newspaper kiosks, and looking at a USA Today front page and thinking, what an odd twist of fate that this great star is, and you'll know this term, is just in the little reefer box at the bottom of the front page. I later had the opportunity for this podcast to ask President Bill Clinton if he was aware that Audrey Hepburn had died on the day of his inauguration, and he was genuinely shocked. He was a fan of hers. He had no idea. Granted, he was busy that day. But what I wanted to do in that case was, in the more than quarter century since she passed, especially with the introduction of social media, I noticed that she was always trending on Twitter. And her career wasn't that long. It was 14 years long. She was a big star, but there were other stars that were bigger. And so in that episode of the podcast and the chapter of the book, I kind of wanted to answer that question of why is she still with us? I theorize that, and after talking to both of her sons, they both impressed on me the impact that almost starving to death in Nazi-occupied Holland during World War II had on her. And when I went back, and this is not fan fiction, she actually did secret dance performances to raise money for the resistance. And when I went back and looked at her movies, I did see this quality of yearning and gratitude in her. Other studios tried to replicate her. They found beautiful, talented actresses like Susan Strasberg, like Millie Perkins, like Maggie McNamara, but none of them had the quality that she did, and I don't think that that's an accident. And in her first Hollywood Screen Test, she doesn't talk about how wonderful it is to be in Hollywood. She talks about the war. So it was really foundational, I think, to her.
That's fascinating. Everyone here knows that Vaughn Meader, as was mentioned, was known to the Kennedy family. Can you talk a little bit about his role and what happened after the president was assassinated?
So I notice, and you are so young, I'm not making any presumptions, and you are holding a First Family album, and I'm so struck by that. So how many here had the First Family album growing up? Okay, a lot of hands. So Vaughn Meader was a stand-up comic, a not very good one, but who had an extraordinary, uncanny ability to impersonate President Kennedy, President John F. Kennedy. He was just a great mimic of him. And at a time when comedy albums were very new, the First Family album, with the Kennedy family having just entered the White House and creating a sensation, the First Family, the producers of this album, of this would-be album, were looking to cast a Kennedy, and they found him after he was on a summer talent show that was on TV. He became incredibly famous, a household name. This is a story that I knew very little about. My producer, Megan Marcus, was the one that suggested it when we were starting the podcast. And she said, I think that this would be a really interesting story that would combine politics and pop culture. And in the CBS News archives, we struck gold and we found a 90-minute interview that Vaughn Meader did a few years before his death. He died in 2004, where he basically described what it was like to be a living reminder of a horrible day. He lived, I think, symbolically for 40 years after the assassination. And his life was very, it had been difficult before. He'd become incredibly famous, and then it would remain extraordinarily difficult after November 22nd, 1963. Obviously, he didn't die on that day. It was his career that died. When that episode is called Death of a Career, but it was more profound than that. And he said in this interview he remembered walking down 2nd Avenue and a steel riveter stopping what he was doing and coming up to him and just putting his hand on Vaughn Meader's arm consolingly. And Vaughn Meader was so angry because he wanted to say, I'm not dead, I'm still here. But what drew me to that story was that it was also the passing of a whole era. Because when Vaughn Meader would do his act on Jack Paar and on other shows, hard as it is to believe, he would either before or after go into his normal voice and essentially apologize for the brashness of imitating a president, because it was seen as so risque. And while the First Family album still holds up, it really does. It's funny. You can just hear it on YouTube. It is so gentle. I mean, it is extremely gentle. It's like it's affectionate, but it was to me it represented a time when that presidency was held in such regard that it was just it wasn't just the death of his career or the passing of the president. It was also the passing of a kind of political comedy.
Could he not do, he could only do Kennedy and no one else? That's sort of an odd thing, a one trick.
He was a Kennedy savant. Yeah. I mean, he was like, yeah, that's what he could do. And I even feel mean saying he wasn't a very good stand-up, but that's what he did. And like a lot of people who become famous for one thing, then he decided he wanted to branch out. And this was before November 22nd. He decided he wanted to be doing a piano act and become a singer. And the producers were basically like, you're nuts. This is what you do, and it's made you very, very famous. But yeah, that was basically what he could do.
What, just another person I was sort of intrigued by was a woman who you said ruled Hollywood, Lois Weber.
Yeah.
And I was particularly taken by how you quoted Hedda Hopper saying how she ruled Hollywood as well. Could you talk a little bit about Lois?
Well, in early Hollywood, I'm interested in these little pockets of progress. Currently, the podcast episode, and I should also point out that the podcast and the book are not just doubles of each other. The book, which I co-authored with Jonathan Greenberg, is about 70% new material, but Lois Weber appears in both. I'm interested in these little pockets of, it almost feels like Camelot. Like, did that really exist? Or maybe I'm thinking Brigadoon. I love musicals, but anyway. But these little eras when you hear about, you think, did that really happen? Well, in early Hollywood, in very early Hollywood, in the silent era, the three most prolific producer-directors were Cecil B. DeMille, D.W. Griffith, and Lois Weber. Not Louis Weber, but a woman named Lois Weber, who was actually an actress, began her life as an actress, and her career as an actress and playwright in Allegheny City, Pennsylvania. She was an evangelist, and she moved to Hollywood when it was basically like the equivalent of a land rush, where it was so new that anyone could get in on it if you had the talent and the drive. And she directed a feature-length version of Merchant of Venice in 1914. In 1 year, she directed and wrote 10 feature-length films. She is a split screen, which is a very common convention. She was the first to use that in a movie called Suspense, very typical of the time. The go-to criminal of the day was usually an Italian, so an actor kind of in a swarthy makeup, who is kind of a Liam Neeson type movie where she acted in it where she's at home with a baby, this Italian guy's trying to get in to attack her, and then her husband comes to the rescue, but she did that in a triptych. So she was really, really innovative. But once Hollywood became big business, Wall Street moved in. And then I like to imagine sort of like the Monopoly cigar chomping guy kind of being like, all right, ladies, step aside. This is real business now. But it's sort of what happened. Yeah.
And what about, I picture you, again and again, Johnny Carson came up. You watched reruns of Johnny Carson. I think of you writing this book and just watching Johnny Carson, again and again. Is that, how much of that, how important was that in writing this book?
Well, I think because my father loved Johnny Carson growing up, and my father sort of threaded throughout this book, it was certainly in spirit for me, but Johnny Carson, I mean, he came up in the death of disco because there was an episode where Ethel Merman came on with Dr. Henry Heimlich and Angie Dickinson. She was promoting her disco album, which really is what helped kill disco. And I love Ethel Merman, don't get me wrong, but she should not have been doing disco. Carson, it's a great resource, and there's a channel, at least in New York, called Antenna, where you can watch unexpurgated, even the 90-minute ones, which are great. They're great time capsules, obviously, but it's so interesting to hear him tell jokes about Watergate or about, the energy crisis, and it's transporting. And by the way, I think you and I had a discussion about Johnny Carson years ago, because I complained to you when Johnny Carson wasn't above the fold on the front page when he died. And you told me...
He should have been above the fold.
He should have been. And you told me that there were complaints, and that you were out of town for that page one meeting when they made the decision.
Huh.
I'm basically saving you here.
Okay,
But anyway,
thank you. Yeah,
if they're
I was
Carson fans,
totally out of
but
town.
I remember this. So I'm obsessed with above the fold, below the fold, which means nothing to people under 40.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of I have one for you. A lot of the decisions about the New York Times obits, whether they be on page one or not, would be the circumstances of death. For example, the one that really jumps to mind is the 60 Minutes correspondent Ed Bradley, who was only 65 when he died of leukemia. And I remember at the time, one of the main reasons that was considered a page one obit, not that he wasn't deserving of a lot of attention, but was he kept it a secret until the very last minute, and he brought some friends in and for sort of a last minute bedside conversations, and it was like Jimmy Buffett was one of the friends he brought in, and that was really it made for an interesting sort of death tale, end of life tale. And I wonder what you think of that, and what you think, how important it is remembering the death versus the life.
Well, so where did Ed Bradley's obit end up?
So that ended up on page one because of the circumstances.
Because of the circumstances.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, and as you know, there's a chapter of the book on died the same day, which is something that's sort of always fascinated me because I think it really highlights the randomness.
The Farrah Fawcett versus
and Michael Jackson. Right. And Annette Funicello and Margaret Thatcher dying on the same day. I kind of love to imagine an afterlife Freaky Friday reboot where they switch places. Margaret Thatcher and How to Stuff a Wild Bikini, which is a real title of an Annette Funicello movie. Wait, but your question was?
No, my question was the circumstances of death and how.
Oh, sure. Well, look, Michael. Well, you and I had a discussion the day that Michael. You're not remembering any of this.
I'm not ready.
When Michael Jackson died. No, because I remember I called you about this because anyway. So when Michael Jackson and Farrah Fawcett died the same day, and you said to me. And I kind of quote you without naming you in the book, sorry. But anyway, that you said this is going to be in every section of the newspaper because it's a story about pop music, about race, about fashion, about money, about celebrity scandal, and it was a shocker, right? Farrah Fawcett had been dying for quite a while.
Right.
She'd been sick for a long
plus,
time.
Michael Jackson, I mean, it's just look what he. For better or for worse, look what he did with his career.
Right, but I love Farrah Fawcett. Listen, the 70s were a sluggish time, and Farrah was just exciting. I liked Farrah. I like to imagine that I went to high school with Farrah Fawcett in Corpus Christi, Texas, and Farrah was always a knockout, but she never preened. She would sing in the ensemble of the school musical. She sang off key, but she sang with heart. Don't tell me that this isn't true. It has to be.
That's why you get to pick in Mobituaries whoever you want to highlight, because it wouldn't fly elsewhere necessarily. But since we're talking about people that you kind of like to write about, let's talk about Melba Moore's sitcom. Because do people even remember Melba Moore? Yeah.
Well, Melba Moore.
Okay.
It was great. I mean, Melba Moore was in the original cast with the musical Hair. And then she won a Tony in Pearly. And what is that? Somebody here, there's got to be like a show tune queen in here who can tell me what the song is she sang in Pearly. I got life. Love. I got love. I got love. And she's in that big chair, right? It's so great. You can see it on YouTube. Melba Moore had everything going on. And this is right after the Vaughn Meader chapter of people who were had something befall them that for circumstances out of their control. And Melba Moore was on her way to superstardom, and CBS gave her a sitcom called Sisters, I think. No, it was called Melba, but the theme song was called Sisters or something. And it was about Melba Moore, who was African American, and her white sister. I don't know. Anyway, it was in 1986, so there were lots of shoulder pads. And CBS, for reasons that will never be understood, chose to air the premiere of Melba's would-be star-making sitcom the night the Challenger exploded. And it's, really a bad choice. And it scored the second lowest ratings in primetime history. And then when they aired the second episode later on, it scored the actual lowest. So, I mean, it's, I mean, not a profoundly important story, but I found it interesting.
Who is the book aimed at? Because I think of like boomers like myself who know who Melba Moore is and eat up every word. But then I think of other people who may never have heard of Melba Moore or you know, station wagons. And what's
The way back wasn't that long way back.
So who are you trying to reach in the book? And has the reaction differed from, the response differed from different age groups?
I mean, I've learned in my career not to try to game the system and not to sort of say, oh, this will be interesting to that group. I don't think that's a good idea. I think I've learned that if you're truly interested in something and it's well executed, there's a better than even chance that other people will come along for the ride. So there's that. This isn't exactly who I want it aimed towards, but I think, other than all the fun and the variety, and by the way, I was the kid, I only liked the variety pack of cereals, hence the random nature, seemingly random nature of much of what I do. But you know, the one with the sugar
Right.
smacks
Like,
and the Cocoa Puffs, and no one liked the Special K. But anyway.
The Fruit Loops.
Fruit Loops, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There was always one that nobody wanted.
Right.
That was usually Special K or All Brand.
No, it's all brand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also want, I think that we're in a time now where I hope that people appreciate a more generous view of the past. I think there's a tendency maybe in the culture to disqualify people for their flaws. Someone who frequently appears here, Doris Kearns Goodwin. I was talking to her the other day for a piece that will air on CBS Sunday Morning, and I said, you know, do you think we should cut the past some slack? And she really lit up, and she said yes. And she said, listen, somebody like President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, she said, yes, it is true he should have allowed more Jewish refugees into the country during World War II. Yes, the internment of Japanese Americans is a terrible stain on this country. He also brought us through World War II and the Great Depression. And that's sort of the spirit I wanted to approach a lot of these people with. I know it's going to seem like a strange transition, but somebody like a Billy Carter. Billy Carter, I like luring people in with something that they think is just going to be kind of zany and fun, and then surprising them, hopefully, with it being meaningful. But Billy Carter is somebody that we remember as a joke. The beer was terrible. The Billy beer was awful. And Dan Rather told me even the dogs wouldn't drink it. But his story is a rich and complicated story, and he was ultimately a really decent guy. And so I want people to enjoy it, and I want them to laugh and be moved, but I also want them to view the past not as necessarily backward, even if it is the past.
No, and I think that's well said, and I think it really is uplifting reading this, because there's a joy in the whole process, in your reporting and the writing, without it feeling like it was sugar-coated.
Right.
In terms of, I do have to ask you, in terms of Billy Carter, you open the chapter saying, quote, has there ever been another presidential family as colorful as Jimmy Carter?
Oh, and here we are in the Kennedy Library.
Yeah. Well, I was actually thinking of like today. I don't know if it's colorful today or...
Right. I mean, I meant colorful as in, kind of in fascinating, but in a deeper way. And here, let me make the case. Their mother, Miss Lillian, at the age of 68, joined the Peace Corps and went to India. Jimmy is number one. Ramrod straight, Naval Academy star, teetotaler. Gloria is next in line. She's Harley Davidson's Female Motorcyclist of the Year in 1978 in the 100,000 Mile Club. Ruth is a faith healer. And then bringing up the rear, 13 younger than Jimmy, is Billy, who smokes, who drinks, who's a very modern figure. If I watched him in a profile that Dan Rather did of him, where to Dan Rather's face, he's making fun of the press, basically saying TV reporters are just told what to say. I mean, it feels very modern. I believed that he was probably an asset to his brother. I think of, if Jimmy was that shining city on the hill, Billy was that dive bar in that city that you need to go to to throw a couple of back. So he was kind of the good old boy. But I had remembered him mostly from Hee Haw and being a buffoon and playing the stereotype of the redneck. And, after he started consorting with representatives of the government of Libya, it happens, and got his brother in trouble. He admitted he was an alcoholic, and he spent the last proud chapter of his life crisscrossing the country, ministering to people who could relate to him about their struggles with alcoholism. So I talked to President Jimmy Carter and Billy's widow and 6 kids, and they describe a complicated, funny, hardworking guy who was ultimately very decent.
Is there anyone that you thought was a great person, and then you started doing research and you thought, oh, this is bad, I'm either not going to include it or what? Like, I feel bad, like slandering the dead, but I was warned away from Evel Knievel. I kind of was drawn to the idea of Evel Knievel because I think that's the kind of thing. I look at things in terms of ratios of protein and carbs, like sugar and sort of sizzle that brings you in, and but you want to balance it. Right. So if somebody wants to make the case for Evel Knievel, stay after and talk to me about him. Really, I'm really curious.
Yeah,
now, but you didn't put it in the book.
No,
because
no.
Okay. Because why? It was a downer.
I heard that he was kind of not a great guy. He wasn't a very good guy.
Yeah.
But let me just say one other thing about presidential families, though. Because I'm in love with this line, sorry. But presidential families are like ordinary families on steroids. And I think that the dynamics we see in our own families are magnified in presidential families. And so that's one of the reasons also I love the story of Billy and Jimmy, because, 2 different brothers and the little brother getting the older one in trouble, that kind of a thing.
Right.
Anyway.
Now, let's get serious here for a minute about your fixation.
We're talking about alcoholism, but all right. Okay, this is pretty serious. But I can.
Your fixation on growing up on the World Book Encyclopedia.
Yes.
And tell us about how you looked up, what a gay person is in there, like that whole odyssey for you.
So I loved the 1974 World Book Encyclopedia growing up, and I feel bad for kids that don't have the experience that I had of coming home after junior high and lying on my stomach on the red carpet in the family room.
Was it a shag carpet?
No, it wasn't a shag carpet. It wasn't a shag, which does make an appearance in the book.
Yes.
And I just loved it, reading about the different countries and paging through the facts and brief and the transparencies with the body parts, the biology sections. I just loved the World Book Encyclopedia from 1974 so much, and I have it lining my New York City apartment. I still have all the volumes. But starting probably around the age of 11, I would surreptitiously pull out the H volume and read the entry on homosexuality, which was wedged between homonym and Homs. I just remember the Syrian city of Homs. And it was like a pathetically short entry. And I read it probably 100 times, I think in the hopes that magically new sentences would appear and maybe tell me something reassuring. And I included it because little did I know at the time, but 1974 was also the year that the American Psychiatric Association ratified the removal of homosexuality from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, the Catalog of Mental Illnesses, which would really change lives in a big way and affect laws and obviously affect psychiatry. But I don't have any bitterness towards the World Book Encyclopedia because, this actually comes back to Johnny Carson, because I remembered that the name on, some encyclopedia entries had authors, not all did, but this one, it said Carl Fred Broderick. And I thought that's got to be a made-up name, because who would ever attach their name to such a forbidden topic? I mean, this got to be made up. And then it turned out that he was a sex therapist and also a Mormon bishop who was a frequent guest on Johnny Carson. And so I went and I looked at all, Megan, my producer, was able to order in all the clips, and I watched them all kind of in 2019, sort of thinking, oh, is he going to say anything on this topic? And of course, in the 1970s, it was just unspeakable except as a punchline, so, or as a subject of kind of horror, but yeah.
You had a nice section on Frank Kameny too, and what his role was in all.
Right. Well, that chapter is really a tribute to Frank Kameny and Barbara Giddings, who were two great activists, and John Fryer, who was a gay psychiatrist who actually testified in front of the American Psychiatric Association in 1972 and helped change minds. He had to wear a mask. He actually got a Nixon mask and altered it so that he could hide his identity and basically say, I'm a psychiatrist and I'm gay, and the rest of you are wrong on this subject.
Another surprising finding that you had in the book was the first African American member of Congress was not elected in the 60s or 50s, but much earlier.
Yeah, like I was saying with Lois Weber, I think that there are these forgotten forerunners, these people. I'll just make one quick tangent here. You know, Jackie Robinson is understandably lauded, but 63 years before Jackie Robinson, a man named Moses Fleetwood Walker was the first African-American man to play what passed for Major League Baseball. And MLB has begun acknowledging him. But when I went, he played in Toledo, and when I went to Toledo, the manager of the current, or an executive with the current Toledo minor league team said, listen, for a color line to be broken, it has to be drawn in the first place. And I thought that was so interesting. And it's drawn in the first place for a reason. So at Churchill Downs, there are, I can't remember offhand, but an astonishing number in the early days of the Kentucky Derby of black jockeys who win. Until after Plessy versus Ferguson, the owners are emboldened to ban black jockeys. And then there's not another black jockey that even competes until the year 2000. I mean, it's astonishing. And the same, and in Congress, I vaguely knew about these African-American men. 2 were senators and more than a dozen were House members, all Republicans, all from southern states, more than half of whom had been enslaved only 7 years before. There's a famous Currier and Ives 1872 print of 6 of them. But I just was, and I think that even though that's Reconstruction, even though Reconstruction was manifestly a failure, I look at that as a story of hope, of what this country is capable of. You can't help but think, oh my God, if federal troops hadn't been withdrawn from the South, or if the federal government had stuck with the plans of Reconstruction, if this all could have stuck. But I talked to Henry Louis Gates and Eric Foner about this, and they said, yeah, what gets lost in the discussion of Reconstruction is that it's a time of incredible hope, that 90% of Southern African-American men go to the polls after they're given the franchise, before voting restrictions and Jim Crow sets in. So I don't mean to be blithe about it and say it's a happy story, because it's ultimately not, but there is a part of it that's incredibly inspiring. And I should also say, one of the things I love about this story, President Obama spoke about this recently, about the messiness of not just people, but also of eras. Blanche K. Bruce is one of the black men who is a senator. He marries an African-American socialite. They existed, and I think a lot of people didn't realize it at that time, a woman named Josephine Wilson. And their home, less than a mile from the White House, becomes a real mecca for Supreme Court justices and their wives, and other House members and their wives. They're absolutely snubbed by some people, no doubt, they're snubbed. But there's a mainstream newspaper that runs an editorial slamming the white congressmen and their wives who do snub the Bruces. And I think that's the surprise, right? That there were good people, and it can't be painted in easy binary way.
What can you just? You're so full of facts and figures.
Is this
and
too many? Am I giving too many facts?
It's
Or
great.
are there any prizes at the end?
No, it's great. But how do you keep track of everything? And how does your brain work? And how did you research this book? Like, what could you tell us about the process?
Sure. So the podcast was the first thing. So the podcast was very, very intense. Some of those topics appear in the book. And then my co-author, John Greenberg, and I spent many, many hours really going through these topics and really discussing them and making sure that these were topics that, like I was saying, not gaming the system, that these were topics that I felt a real personal connection to. And in the book, you'll see, I try to be judicious about it. So not just to shove my own personal experience in, for the sake of it, but like in the chapter on homosexuality and the DSM, I'm more prominent there and less prominent in other chapters. And I think we were both research junkies. I am with my pieces on CBS Sunday Morning, and so that was, I think, a lot of the fun of it, just doing a lot of researching.
And how much was like digging up documents and watching old clips and so forth, and how much was like interviewing people?
The interviewing was more important than I initially thought. So, for instance, somebody like Marlene Dietrich, she's remembered as a great screen siren, but she's less well remembered as a fierce American patriot. Her daughter, Maria Riva, wrote a very acclaimed book about her mother, but was unavailable for an interview. So I talked to Marlene Dietrich's grandson, which I like doing because grandchildren have different relationships than children, and so it was a different take. And that formed a really important part of it. He told me a story that I just loved that opens the chapter. He said that in 1972, when Marlene Dietrich, who had become an international cabaret star, concert star, he was 20 years old, and he was on a stage with her in London, and she was doing a lighting check, and a man up in the rafters had a follow spot, and she would say to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right, and the guy up in the rafters finally went, all right, I think we're good enough. And then her lighting director was standing there and said, hey, she'll tell you when you're ready. Wow. So she goes more left, left, right. And then the grandson turned to the lighting director and said, how does she know when it's right? And then he said, when it's burning her eyeballs dead center, she knows it's right. And that seemed like Marlene Dietrich was so hardcore in everything. And here she is, German to the core, and she renounces her German citizenship before World War II. Hitler tries to lure her back. He sends his foreign minister in 1937 with a mother's cross that would have essentially made her queen of Germany. And she says no, but she does more than say no and renounce her citizenship. She spends 18 months at the front line, really putting herself in great danger to defeat her former homeland. So in that case, I felt like the personal interview was really, really important to get a sense of just how kind of ballsy she was, and that everything was 100% with her.
Given all your, by the way, have you ever done Jeopardy?
I did, and this really hurts. I came in second. But I'll tell you why I came in second. The reason I came in second is because Celebrity Jeopardy is really dumbed down. And I think what I did is I overthought it. So at the end, when they were like, this cruise line with a Scandinavian name has, been #2 in the cruise industry for 20 years running. And I was like, oh my God, what is Lincolnberry? What is what is Strindberg Cruise Lines or something? And it was, what is Norwegian Cruise Lines? I mean, they don't ask that on regular Jeopardy. So I think the reason I lost, well, I don't want to say it.
But you're too smart for Celebrity Jeopardy. So who won?
John Berman of CNN.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't ever speak that name again in front of me. I love John. He's great.
So after all your research, are there any obits you've seen in whether New York Times, Life magazine, Newsweek, anywhere where you thought, oh my God, they got it so wrong?
That's interesting. I don't know that I thought of things. I mean, look, I love a good razzle-dazzle first line. I was sort of disappointed with the first line of Ronald Reagan's obit, because it was basically like he was the oldest president. I'm like, that's not that interesting. And, but I can't, I'm more likely to think of the ones that I really loved. I can't think of any, certainly in the book, I tried to, reshape how people
Right.
or remember them, but that's not a commentary on their original obits.
Okay, fair enough. So let's get down to like serious stuff here, and that is the Flintstones.
The Flintstones, sure.
Now, I don't understand personally, it's your book, but I don't understand why you go on about the Flintstones but not the Jetsons.
I just was never a Jetsons person. It's just totally unrealistic.
But they were the
this
same
is the reason
show.
I'm a history guy. I'm not interested in the future. I'm interested in the past. And the Flintstones is, it's the past, right? That's how
They were kind of the
people
same,
got to work on
the same
riding
show.
dinosaurs. What?
Weren't they kind of the same show?
Sort of, I think, but the Jetsons didn't have those great animal appliances. Now, that's what I like. I like the woolly mammoth dishwasher who goes, "It's a living." Like, I love that kind of a thing.
And how about, you mentioned earlier the station wagon, death of the station wagons. Do you miss station wagons? What is it about station wagons?
Well, I love the way back, and I loved, and my family, we only had a station wagon for a short time. I can barely remember it. My mother claims that it started moving backwards when she put it in park, and so my father, who was very safety conscious, got it, turned it in for an Impala sedan really quickly. So I think that I really became friends with kids because their families had station wagons, because I wanted to be in the way back, because I just loved the out-of-control feeling of if a parent made a wide turn and getting thrown against the side of the way back. It's the same reason that I always fantasized about climbing inside of a dryer and turning it on, which I'm glad I didn't succeed in doing that. But I loved being able to, the idea of lying down back there. Look, I know it was a death chamber, but I think the Bradys had a station wagon, and who was more all-American than the Bradys?
Really? I mean, in truth.
Well, I know. Okay, yes, I understand. Right,
Yeah.
but at
on
the time,
TV, right.
At the time, the Bradys were kind of cool,
Yeah,
right?
that's-
And they had two Plymouth satellites, two different Plymouth satellites.
Why don't you have, like, you mentioned the K cars and the Chrysler, why not like the Gremlin? Is that just personal taste?
Because there has to be a sequel.
Yeah.
And that's how, exactly, you got to leave them wanting more.
So,
in my business, you'll learn that early.
so speaking of your business, what is your bit like? Is it a comedian, reporter, journal? Like, what are you?
I find this a vexing question, but I also understand that it has to be asked. I don't know, like what, when in your tax return, when you write occupation, it's not easy for me to do that. And honestly, I used to kind of beat myself up for that. I'm just sort of interested in what I'm interested in, and I hope that other people become interested in it too. But yeah, and so, I mean, if deploying humor helps, great, but I don't think that that's a must, because sometimes it's not appropriate. So, yeah, I mean, it sounds precious to say, but I like to tell stories, so, yeah, on TV and on the page, and podcasting.
And one question I have is, when I was at the Times, I sometimes would watch The Daily Show and think, they're doing it better than we are in terms of packaging and covering politics in certain ways. And I see that now sometimes with whether it's The Daily Show or Seth Meyers or John Oliver. And I wonder if you consider I as a journalist, sometimes think of them as journalists. Is that,
Well, I think
is that right or wrong, or what do you
my
think?
executive producer, who is really amazing at CBS Sunday Morning, Rand Morrison, believes, and I don't disagree with him, that what John Oliver does is really something new. It's a kind of an investigative journalism comedy show, and that does feel like a very new thing. Yeah, and the other guys as well. I know that Seth Meyers has the closer look, and obviously Colbert with his monologue. Yeah.
I mean, do you trust them as you would a journalist?
No, I don't. I don't, and I don't think they would ask for that kind of trust either. I mean, it depends. Listen, some topics are more conducive to comedy than others. I found in my time on The Daily Show that it was much easier to satirize a politician's dishonesty because it was a person and a disparity between what a person said and did, and that space is where the funny is. It was much easier to do that than make comedy out of a healthcare proposal, and a healthcare proposal is undoubtedly really important, right? So certain topics social issues are just always going to be better fodder than fiscal issues, say, for comedy. So it's not a balanced way to get the news, to be informed.
Of all the Mobituaries that you've done before the book on the podcast or on TV, what's the one that's got the most reaction?
I think people are very touched by the Billy Carter story. I think people also love Sammy Davis Jr., as I do. I think the Chang Eng Story is an extraordinarily rich story. It packs, I mean, I call it the death of an American story. I think in the podcast it was a death of a messy American dream.
And that drew me in when you went to Mount Airy, where the Andy Griffith Show was filmed, right? And talk about the twins.
So Chang and Eng, basically, Mount Airy, which is where Andy Griffith modeled, it was his hometown, and it was the model for Mayberry. There's an Andy Griffith Museum there. And it couldn't be more sort of metaphorical. Underneath, in the basement of it, is the Chang and Eng Museum. And I say that it's symbolic because Chang and Eng is also a very American story. It's a different kind of American story. Chang and Eng are conjoined twins who are essentially, they're not kidnapped. They leave with their mothers, and I think, frankly, their own approval as young as teenagers, but they're indentured servants. They come to this country, become two of the very first entertainers. This predates P.T. Barnum. It predates Chinese immigration and the building of the railroad. And they're a very big deal. They win their freedom. So it's an incredible immigration story, a pull yourself up by your bootstraps story. They find wives, they find spouses, and they settle in North Carolina because the Blue Ridge Mountains remind them of the hills of Siam. And then they own slaves. And it's at that part of the story that you're like, oh, I was loving you, I was rooting for you, and then this. But it also makes it a more important, forgive me, richer story. Yunta Wang, an author I interviewed for this, said, they were honorary Southern white gentlemen, and this was success for them at the time, and it felt like a kind of story that packs it all in, all the great stuff and the dark side in this story. And they did have extraordinary lives, and they were extraordinary despite this.
The one thing that I found really sort of moving was the end of their lives when one of them died. Can you talk about that?
The two questions everybody has about Chang and Eng is how do they die and how do they reproduce? Because they had 21 kids. Everyone wants to know how they had sex. And no? Okay, anyway, all right, so, okay. But at the end of their lives, Chang, who had a lot of health problems, suffered a stroke, and Eng essentially dragged him around for 3 years. It's a heartbreaking, terrible, terrible story. And forgive me, it's also something a little bit out of a horror film because they were in Eng's home. They would alternate homes 3 days at a time. And they were in Eng's home when Eng's son walked in and saw that his Uncle Chang had died. And they knew enough about medicine to know that when one died, it was only a matter of hours before the other would die. And so, I mean, here you've lost the closest person in your life, and you also, the clock is ticking for your own death. So it's unimaginable. The relatives rubbed his feet and legs to try to keep the circulation going. The surgery today would have been fairly simple.
Yeah, I have to pursue that a little, given my running a health and medical thing, publication. What you talk about how we'll look back on medical practices 100 years from now. What would you say?
Well, I think that in 100 years or even 50 years, we'll look back at the way we treat cancer as barbaric. And I just think that's, I just don't want to be smug about who we are on any score. And once again, I think it's looking at the past and with an open heart and recognizing greatness even in people that weren't always great. And but yeah, medicine, I think there's a chapter on medieval medicine and how some of what was in medieval medicine based, like bloodletting, was a common treatment and is coming back also, leeches, but until the 1920s.
And a total segue to one of my favorite movies that you talk about in here, What's Up, Doc?
Oh, I love What's Up, Doc.
Yeah, it's just like, what is it about What's Up, Doc, and what is it about Barbra Streisand that you're so that has your attention?
Well, I know it makes me a cliche, but I have to own my love of Barbra Streisand, and I knew that I had to get her in the book somehow. Oh, sorry, I wasn't going to do anything desperate, but anyway, but I had to get her in the book. So I used Fanny Brice, just as she did in her film debut. I used Fanny Brice to get Barbra in the book, and that, by the way, is also kind of a forgotten forerunner story. I mean, I like this idea of kind of like Moses, like beginning the journey, leaving Egypt, but then he doesn't finish the journey, and then Joshua finishes it. And that's sort of like Fanny Brice and Barbra.
No, I see it throughout the book.
Right? And that's Fanny Brice, because Fanny Brice she's not beautiful, but she's really funny. She makes a virtue of her looks and her comedic talent, certainly, to become part of the Ziegfeld Follies, the SNL of its time. But there's only so far she can go. She can't, even after getting a nose job, and Dorothy Parker said she cut off her nose despite her race. But but she couldn't go so far. But then Barbra was born at a time, and also Barbra just has much more talent and has that voice, and could actually sort of complete the journey in a sense and become a big mainstream star. And I just also think that What's Up, Doc is the real funny girl, because I think it's so funny. I think it's great.
It's hilarious.
Yeah. She looks terrific in it too. She's great. Yeah. I hope she reads the book. I've sent her the book.
Have you heard from anyone in the book that's still alive? Have you heard from anyone?
Well, I love Angie Dickinson, and she's on the back of the book. She's my blurb. She and Walter Isaacson are my blurbs.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's kind of like, that sort of encapsulates my range of interests.
And so there's something for everyone in this book.
Yeah, I hope so.
So what's...
By the way, can I just tell you that I have, 27 years ago, I had a special Mo Rocca stamp made. It's my name with 2 little maracas. And so afterwards, if you want me to personalize, sign your book, I will put it makes me feel like a notary public.
Can I get it on my thing?
Okay, let me get here. I have to get the ink pad out. No. Okay, hold on. Let's just do this. All right, go to window 3.
I love the maracas. That's great. Now, why should people? This is
buy the book?
Yeah, no. If they can.
I mean, how much more can I say at this point?
They can see you on TV. They do the podcast. What does the book offer that they can't get on those other platforms?
Well, the podcast is for good reasons, is primarily 20th century figures. There are exceptions. For Chang Eng, there was a family reunion of their descendants, which is fascinating, and that's what brought it into the present. I would not want to try to do a podcast on the station wagon. I'm sure it could be done, but it's much easier to do a Billy Carter And I should point out that the chapter in the book is very different than the podcast with Billy Carter, because we talked to President Carter later. But in any case, no, there are certain things like the belief in dragons is something that the death of the belief in dragons is something that's in the book and not in the podcast, because it's something that takes place in 1735 and before.
Got it.
So it wouldn't have been so there's a much wider range in time.
We're going to, in a minute, take questions, so have your questions ready, and I think there are microphones or places to line up right there. So while people are lining up, let me ask you another question, and that is, who did you leave out? Like, if you had more room.
There were people that were left out, largely because running out of time and space. One person who, if there is a sequel, will be in there is Nellie Bly, the crusading muckraking journalist, 10 Days in a Madhouse. It's the kind of, I keep thinking there should be, it's like Oscar bait, like the kind of movie, the kind of role that would win someone an Oscar. But Nellie Bly would be one. I'm trying to think, not many. I want to do somebody on a forgotten forerunner, John Hughes, not the film director, but the 19th century bishop who built St. Patrick's Cathedral, but he was known as Dagger John. When the Irish came to America in big numbers in the 1850s, they were really the underclass. And he's this extraordinary figure that hires Renwick, the great WASP architect, to build St. Patrick's to make a statement, and it's the highest point in America for a brief time. But he galvanizes the Irish community, and they really are an underclass. And the next generation, they become teachers, they become cops, they become firemen. So he's a really amazing figure. Those are the two that spring to mind.
Let's go to questions. Please identify yourself.
I feel bad. My back has been to all these people.
My name is Sheila Jones.
Hi.
And I'm always fascinated about the Times above the fold. So how does that happen to, who decides who gets to be above the fold?
You answer that. Who decides how you get above the fold? Barbara better be above the fold.
Well,
in 40 years.
Certain ones are obvious, but I think.
On that note, I would have thought Audrey Hepburn would have been above the fold.
Well, I mean, she couldn't, yeah, but I mean, it was Bill Clinton's inauguration.
Oh, right, okay. So,
No, there used to be, I haven't, I left the Times like about 5 or 6 years ago, but was there for a very long time, and there used to be heated debates about front page and obits, and it would depend partly on what happened in the news that day, what was competing.
That's always what they say.
It would also depend on the circumstances of the death, and thank you. And it would also depend on the whim of frankly, the executive editor at the time, who would have the final say. And there was one fight that I had, it wasn't really a fight, where I felt very strongly that someone should be on page one. Who was one of your, I don't know if he was ever one of your direct colleagues, but I thought Don Hewitt, the creator of 60 Minutes, should have been on page one of the New York Times. I felt very strongly, and the executive editor at the time said, was very dismissive.
Did he get in the little box at the bottom?
He probably got the little reefer box at the bottom, but there's a whim involved in too. Just yes.
No, I just want to point out that I still cannot get over the fact that that Richard Rodgers was above the fold, Oscar Hammerstein was below the fold, and this is an example of the New York Times' long-running anti-lyricist bias. And it's got to stop. Judy Garland was not on the front page, by the way.
Oh, come on.
Which is kind of crazy. Or maybe she wasn't on the front page, but she was below the fold. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Paul Uvino, I guess I'd start with Hammerstein, you got to be taught.
What's that, sorry?
You got to be taught. I was quoting a lyric from Oscar
Oh, you
Hammerstein.
have to be South Pacific, right, yeah.
First of all,
Happy talking.
family had a 1959 Ford Country Squire station wagon with the wood on the side.
Yep.
I survived sitting in the third row without a seatbelt. I'm here. So it was an experience you should have had.
And I think the Ford Country Squire was 19 feet long. It's crazy. There weren't space. Did you ever parallel park it? If so, you deserve a gold medal.
I don't remember. I think I was driving probably. We had it long enough. I was probably driving. It was a tank. It was probably
great.
the safest, probably more metal in one fender of that car than 3 of the cars I've sold since. I hope they come back. And I think some people are saying that the minivan and the SUVs will run their course, but that's another story for another day. Sign of my age, I was in basic training in Fort Polk, Louisiana in July of 1969, and I'm walking by a news box, and I think it was the Times-Picayune. It was Leesville was the biggest town. You can make of that town by its name what it was like. But I walked by, and bit of civilian life seeing a newspaper, there was this picture of this little girl named Judy Garland who died. And it was Judy Garland maybe when she was 14. And my question is, I'm wondering is there a disparity by culture or by parts of the country, how they would treat an obituary? I don't know how it was treated in the New York Times or other major newspapers. But down in Louisiana, it was the little over the rainbow Wizard of Oz, Judy Garland. And I'm just wondering if it's a sectional, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, that's very sweet that they chose to use a picture to remembering her, right, as from her youth. And I think probably what you said, the executive editor probably has more leeway than we realize. There's no style guide.
There's no guide. Some people may say, let's remember her early days, or they have a particular fondness, or someone else might often, there's a photo of someone more recent. So there's really no rule book.
Can I just point out of something about the second Darren on Bewitched?
Right.
So this has vexed an entire generation, right? The 2 Darrens, they were both named Dick. The first Darren was much better, Dick York. Everybody knows that. He was a Jim Carrey good. The second Darren was Dick Sargent. But Dick Sargent, by all accounts, even though he wasn't very good and the ratings plummeted, he was a very nice guy. And I always feel badly that Dick Sargent died on the same day as Kim Il-sung. So it's like, it's hard enough being the second Darren, and then on the day you expect to get some love, you're overshadowed by a genocidal maniac. It's just not fair.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Erica. Mo, this question is not about the book, but love you on Wait Wait, and you might not be able to answer this, it might be unfair, but if you could craft your dream Wait Wait panel, who would be the panelists?
Oh, you know I can't do this. We're live streaming.
Whisper, just we won't tell.
Okay, it would be me, Thomas Paine, and Barbra Streisand? No, I don't know.
Go ahead. Yep.
So, well, it's in line with the last question, can you just talk some about what it's like to be on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me?
Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me is, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me is a public radio news comedy quiz show. We're in our 21st, maybe almost 22nd year at this point. It's wonderful. It's like, I have found in life that fun does not equal easy. Like, I hate when people are like, just have fun. Like, it's like things are fun when you work at them, when you practice, when you're good at them. Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me is the only job that I've had that's fun and easy, though. It's the exception of the rule. And that's because Peter Sagal and the producers build the show all week. The panelists are just sort of dropped in there, and we basically get to be like loudmouths. They encourage us to say as much as we want. It's sort of a fantasy open mic night because you've got an editor who will clean up the jokes that don't work, and you don't have to deal with the stench of stale beer. But it's you just get to go and kind of mouth off. It's especially fun because everybody comes from a different business, sort of. So it's not like I imagine a comedy show where everybody's sort of competing, because, you know, Roxanne Roberts is a columnist for the Washington Post. Roy Blunt Jr. is a Southern writer. I mean, we all are coming from different places. Also, a couple of other things is, you know, the contract that the audience has with the show is that these are a group of people having fun and that they're coming up with this stuff on the spot. And there's a lesson in here somewhere. If you walk in there with what you think is a perfectly crafted joke and you think, I'm going to wait for the right moment and I'm just going to drop this, it won't land. It won't work because the audience, I think, subconsciously is sort of thinking something's off. Like, that's not what this is. This is about you guys coming up with stuff on the spot. It's a group of friends just having fun. And lastly, I'll say that it's a show that made me comfortable sounding like myself. When I was first on the show, I was trying to do some sort of arch ironic thing, and I think that many people are repelled by the sound of their voice when they first hear it. And I think that I think when I let go of that and just sort of said, you know what, I'm just going to sound like myself, I started having a better time and getting more laughs. So,
Thank you.
sorry, more than you wanted to know. It's all right.
My name is Dick Leonard, and a lot of touchstones that you've given me. I remember in the 50s laying on my carpet and reading the Encyclopedia Britannica. Yeah. And your TV show I find very interesting because it has such great content, not only old technologies and some of the newest technologies.
Right. Oh wait, the favorite part, and then and the last thing was about advice on the past, or.
For people reflecting on the past.
I think it's. I hope this doesn't sound hokey. I think if you feel anxious in the present about the future, the past is a place not for escape, but for context and for hope. Yeah.
Hi.
Yes, sir.
Hi.
You talked a lot about how the World Book was sort of pivotal to your love of facts and collecting data and stories. What inspired the transition from that to becoming a storyteller, to sharing it with other people?
Well, you know, I always loved. I guess I always. That's interesting because it's fun to know stuff just for the sake of knowing stuff, right? That's when I would read the World Book. That's what I was doing, and memorizing state flowers and things like that. But I think that when I started working on a show called Wishbone, and I had a fancy college education, but my real education in terms of telling stories was when I worked on a PBS show called Wishbone about a Jack Russell Terrier who in his dream life becomes the heroes of classic novels. Wacky, I know, but it worked. And it was in the mid-90s, and it was for kids 6 to 11 years old. And taking some of the greatest novels, stories largely of the Western canon, and reducing them, not dumbing them down, but distilling them to a half hour for 6 to 11-year-old kids was incredibly oh my God, I just said it. But it was like, it was really, it was formative, and it was inspiring. And I know this doesn't exactly answer your question, but I will tell you, kids can sniff out bad writing and bad storytelling when you're just marking time, when you're just filling space. I learned in that project the importance of leanness and dynamism and keeping things going. And so I suppose that these two loves came together. I mean, the fun thing about a project like this, I'll tell you, is that you can, a producer for Wait, Don't Tell Me, when I first came up with this idea, I said, Ian, is this idea too generic, Mobituaries? Because you can apply it to anything, really, like the pre-presidency of Herbert Hoover or the belief in dragons, or, and he looked at me and he said, Mo, any good podcast idea is an excuse to talk about anything. And I actually found that kind of profound. I think that's creatively, for any kind of media, that makes sense. Like, good ideas are not rigid and self-limiting. So, I don't know that I ever answered your question, but I hope there was something in there. Yeah. You can work with it. Workshop it. So, yeah.
My name is Mary. Humor is so enjoyable for a lot of reasons, and one thing it does is to help us not to feel desperate about really terrible situations. But I'm wondering, would you comment on the danger of trivializing things that are really important? Does humor sort of, is there a worry about treating something lightheartedly that is a serious thing? Just
well,
about that.
it's a fair question. I mean, I like, you know, again, I'd like to take something like the death of sitcom characters, something that seems just sugary and fun, and draw you in with that. And then, in that case, I think it was sort of an interesting story about suspension of disbelief. And, you know, it was an episode I did about the two Darrens and about Richie Cunningham's older brother, Chuck Cunningham, who disappeared from Happy Days. But conversely, like the Reconstruction story, the Black Congressman of Reconstruction, the word Reconstruction makes people go, ugh. But when you focus on these men, it's suddenly, like, obviously human and dynamic. So I would never just, you know, I mean, I like to have fun a lot of the time, and there are bits throughout the book, little sections with just little pop-ups, basically, and those are oftentimes just fun, but certainly in the longer essays, I would never want something to just be silly. I mean, you know, but I suppose there is a danger. I hope I'm not treading on that line. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, my name's Joanne, and my heart is just beating because I'm so excited to see you in person tonight.
Oh my God. How do I look compared to what you thought I was going to do?
2 thumbs up.
Yeah, I just feel like I'm looking a little. My hair looks good. I know that. So yeah. Oh, you look great. Yeah. So, yeah.
I just wanted to thank you because I'm so excited every time you have a new release on your podcast, and it makes my commute into Boston for work much more bearable on the Southeast Expressway.
Thank you so much. It's awfully. Wow, that's very nice. Thank you. That's very flattering.
My name is Mariana. What's fun about you, Mo, is that you're like a kid. You haven't grown up. Can you tell us about your favorite elementary school teacher?
Do you?
That is such a good question.
So I loved Miss Venici, Mildred Venici. Do you know this? Okay, all right, okay. This is a plan. So I thought he was rushing her out or something. No, this is getting too controversial. All right, so I loved Mildred Venici, and in fact, there is an episode in the works for the 3rd season about the death of certain names, and I went back and I talked to her recently, because Mildred, she said she never liked the name Mildred, and Mildred has gone way down in popularity. Also Todd, I don't know what happened to Todd, but we were thinking of doing Bertha, Mildred, and Todd, because, anyway, and I just thought that, and what's interesting is once I was in the lunch line at Woodacres Elementary School in 5th grade, and I liked Miss Venici so much, and I don't know what got into me. I could act out sometimes in school, and she walked by and I said, "Hey, Millie, what's shaking?" And she walked over and she said, "Don't you ever do that again." And when I went back and I interviewed her last year, she was like, "Oh, all my friends call me Millie." And I said, "Well, do you remember when I did this?" And she didn't remember at all, but it had stayed with me. But I loved her. I also thought, I used to love the way that she would walk around, and then your desk, and then she would just sit on the desk and cross her legs. And if she sat on your desk, it just felt exciting or something. Anyway. She was really stylish. She had great hair. Yeah. I love Miss Venici. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Mo. So I'm realizing that I basically grew up with you because I watched Wishbone, and I remember watching you on VH1, and now you're on CBS, and Wait, Don't Tell Me and everything. So do you realize, or do you feel like you've become the icon that you are?
Oh, I don't know. Well, I don't know about that. I mean, Well, somebody did say to me once, they said, really smart for you to get on CBS Sunday Morning because now you're like, your audience is just going to age with you. And thanks. Yeah, I mean, look, I love when people say that they've been watching me for a long time. And Sunday Morning is, I mean, it's a great place to be because it's like going back to college and taking only electives, which I wish I'd done the first time. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name's Rob. We had a Dodge Monaco station wagon. I think they made 4.
Okay, in '84.
No, they only made 4.
Oh, they only made 4. Okay.
I don't think they were very popular.
Okay.
My question is, who is your favorite celebrity guest star on the Flintstones?
On the Flintstones?
Wow.
Oh, probably Anne Margaret.
Oh,
yeah, Anne Margaret. Well, in my continuing series on like broads, dames, and gals, which I'm doing on CBS Sunday Morning, and when I asked Angie Dickinson, I said, "Are you a broad, a dame, or a gal?" She went, "All 3," and then she was dealing cards, and she was playing poker with me. But Anne Margaret is like on the list.
Not Cary Grant.
Who? What?
Gary. I'm sorry, Gary. Wait, Gary.
Oh.
Wait, Cary Grant.
Yeah. It was Cary Grant's character. Yeah.
Wasn't it Cary Grant?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, no, he was fine. Yeah.
That's why I'm not like in this. But can we get before? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Keep going.
No, I just want to ask you. I just want to circle back to Macy's because I'm a bad reporter. I didn't follow up on like what kind of fragrance were you hawking? You know?
All right. So let's just be very clear. I was not a spritzer. The spritzers are in front of the counter. There are male models. I was a specialist behind the counter. So if the male model was like bait, I would like cast out the reel and hope that he would lure like the customer and then I'd reel them in. And I learned some really valuable lessons there. So, and I still remember, by the way, like the pitch lines for all the different Chanel fragrances, because it was Chanel. Like Chanel number 19 is for the businesswoman who is still a woman. Like she was like it was like, she was like, you know, in a boardroom, but she still smelled great. All right. And Chanel number 22 is if you wanted to smell like the Queen Mother. I was a big Queen Mother fan, and she wore 22. Cristal was like for the tennis playing, like socialite. Coco was for the divorcee looking to get her groove back. And number 5 is if you wanted to smell like your French teacher. Okay. And so, but what I learned, and this is where everything came together with my world capital knowledge. So a lot of, for whatever reason, diplomats from the United Nations would come to the counter, and I was working on commission. And so, you know, a diplomat would come up, and I found that just knowing one piece of information made the person think that I knew a lot more. So, like, a diplomat would come up, and I would be like, you know, where are you from? And he'd say, I am from Burundi. And I'd say, oh, are you from Bujumbura? How do you know so much about my country? And then, like, the next day, somebody goes, where are you from? Oh, I am from the Kingdom of Brunei. Oh, are you from Bandar Seri Begawan? Why, how do you know so much about my kingdom? And it was a great way to make sales. Hi.
So I was thinking, it seems like everything's very well thought out. How did you plan your chapters?
How did I what, sorry?
Plan your chapters, like the order of them for your obituaries. Oh,
in the book? Oh, this was a suggestion of our editor, Emily Graff, to, it's chronological by death date. So, however, to confuse things a little bit more, the Forgotten Forerunners are sort of spaced evenly through the book. But basically it begins with the death of the belief in dragons, since that happens, that's the earliest thing, and then it ends, well, it ended with my father at the end, but yeah, and I wanted also for each essay, each chapter to be followed by what I call a graveyard, kind of related smaller capsule biographies that are related in a surprising way. So for instance, Sammy Davis Jr. is the death of the entertainer. And it's a real love letter, not only to Sammy, but the kind of entertainment that passed with him. But then after that is 4 pages on other one-eyed wonders, like other people with one eye. So it's like Wiley Post, who went up in the air with Will Rogers and then came down, or Peter Falk, of course. And so there's some really awesome people with one eye that are in the book. And I just learned that James Thurber had one eye. I was at the Thurber House in Columbus, Ohio, and I didn't know, so I feel really bad that he's not in the book. Or like Thomas Paine, who had his body dug up and his bones scattered throughout the world, basically. His chapter is followed by other disembodied body parts. So like Galileo's middle finger, Einstein's brain, Grover Cleveland's jaw. So those are like little, you like that one. Yeah.
You mentioned that you end with your father. When you think about all that you cover in the book, what do you think he most would have appreciated?
Well, I hope he would have appreciated what I wrote about him, but I think my father liked the words marvelous and delightful. And you know, a shrink might have something to say about this, but too bad. But throughout this whole project, I found myself thinking, would this delight him? And I think that's a motivation I'm happy to it works for me, and I think he would be delighted by it. I think he was, you know, I think he would I think he'd appreciate the humor, but also the compassion with which people are treated. And I write about this in the book. My father took up the trumpet when he was 50 years old. He had, as a young boy, played the trumpet, and he stopped because life interfered. He started a small business. He got married. He had 3 children. And my mother, in 1979, for Christmas, went down to a pawn shop in downtown D.C. and got him a trumpet. And I remember distinctly him opening it up. And every weekday morning, he would go into the cellar and play for half an hour, working on his scales and on his embouchure, which is how the lips fit around the mouthpiece. It's really hard. And then at night, he would spend an hour playing Dixieland jazz in the basement, and I would put on metal roller skates that go over my sneakers. And there was a pole in the middle, so if I skated fast enough, it was like I was doing a triple sow cow. And my mother hates this part of the story, but the dryer had crapped out in the mid-'70s, so we hung our sheets and towels in lines in the basement. But it was great for me because it was like Xanadu, basically, going in and out. And I was the only person that probably skated to the Basin Street Blues or When the Saints Go Marching In. But my father did not think that he was going to be a star. He did not think that he would end up playing at the Blue Note. He did it because he loved it, and it was an act of faith and joy. His buddies and he formed a band, and they didn't play big concert halls. They played at nursing homes, sometimes at restaurants. But I'm telling you, when he played those places, he might as well have been playing the Blue Note. So it was that made I think a big impact on me.
Well, I can't think of a better tribute to your father, and aren't we the lucky ones to benefit and to have such a delightful and uplifting book, and one that I learned so much from. So thank you very much for sharing this with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
thank you all very much.
Thanks to all of you, and especially sharing your stories about your station wagons. And thanks to Kennedy Library for hosting us.
Yes, thank you so much, Kennedy Library.